Kashgar, for me, is the coolest city in the coolest part of all of China. In this video, you're going to see a few reasons why that is. And the plan of action is to first visit probably the grandest and most important Islamic structure in all of the province, and then go back into the old town, which we saw briefly in the previous video, to have a proper look there. This in front of us is the Abakh Khoja mausoleum and is by far the most incredible piece of Islamic architecture that I've seen anywhere in Xinjiang. There is a lot to talk about with this one, but I promise I'm going to try and keep it reasonable. I am aware that I find these things much more fascinating than most, so I'm going to try and reel it in a little bit, but look at it, and it's stunning. Look at how the green tiles almost turn blue in the sunlight. This was built almost 400 years ago in 1640, and not actually for Abakh Khoja, after whom it is named. It was actually built for his dad Yusuf Khoja, who was an important missionary for Islam in the area at the time, and he was buried here in 1640. But 50 years later, when his son Abakh Khoja died, they named it after him because he ended up being a bigger deal than his dad. And then since then, 5 generations of the Khoja family were buried here, for a total of 72 people inside there. So when you enter through these wonderful doors, you'll actually see 58 tombs, not 72. There are 14 missing. There was an earthquake about 60 years ago that destroyed part of the building and some of the tombs. The building was restored, the tombs were not, so we're 14 down. As you sneak around the side to get a view from the rear, I mean, look at it. This is the most influential Muslim burial site in all of Xinjiang. It's also possibly my favourite building I've seen anywhere in China so far. Look at the colour scheme with the greens, the yellows, the blues. I might go home and paint my entire house these colours. It looks brilliant. So there you have it, possibly the finest example of proper Islamic architecture you will see anywhere in China. You'll see loads of this in Central Asia and of course in the Middle East as well, but not in this country. That's a pretty big deal. Just next door is this, the Id Kah Mosque. This was built a little bit later in the 19th century. It does have a fantastically decorated ceiling, and outside has 62 of these pillars, all of which are designed differently. As a whole, if you've been to Central Asia, like I've said a couple of times, you will recognize this kind of structure. Not common in China, very common in Central Asia, and very, very cool. The close-up, you'll see the differences. A lot of them go with the same color scheme, but not the exact same style. So every one of these is a bit different. Really cool example of Uyghur woodworking ability. Now, very briefly, before we finish and go and look at the old town, there are 2 more things that I cannot not mention about this place. The first of which is about who is not buried here. Now, it's kind of famous for who is buried here, but it's also kind of famous for who is missing as well. So this site is known as Xiangfei to the Chinese because it's the burial site, allegedly, of the fragrant concubine. She was a Uyghur Muslim woman that naturally emitted very nice smells, and that is why the Qinglong Emperor decided to take her as his consort, the only Uyghur and or Muslim woman to be taken as a consort of an emperor at the time, back to Beijing to go and live with him. Now, the important thing here is there are 2 very different stories about this, one from the Chinese version and one from the Uyghur side. The Chinese version is she went to Beijing, eventually got used to it, quite liked it, eventually died naturally, and then the emperor sent her back here with 120 people to carry her body for 3.5 years to be buried back in Kashgar, where she came from. But the Uyghurs have a very short version of this. They said she didn't want to go. She took knives up her sleeves, tried to attack the emperor to get away from him, and then was poisoned and remained sent back here. That story, as mythical and wonderful as it is, carries a lot of political implications, as you can imagine, between the Han and the Uyghurs, the Muslims, everything else. But ultimately, she was said to be buried back here. But it was found out not long ago by some scholars that the casket that he sent back over that 3.5 years, which did apparently happen, was empty, and he just buried it wherever he wanted to. So she's not actually here after all. And looking back inside the tomb briefly, you can see the cart on which it is said she was transported all that time ago. Lastly, and very briefly on the burial subject, if you peep through this fence, you will see a gigantic above ground mud brick cemetery. This isn't royal by any means. This is just how the Uyghur people of the area used to be buried, and as far as I am told, this used to circle the entire tomb of Abakh Khoja, but was recently made smaller to make room for other stuff in the area. But at least we can see some remains of how things used to be done in the area. And anyway, they're not all super old. There's some of these really recent, like this one is dated 2023, so it's still in action. Oh, okay, I'm done. Let's go into the city of Kashgar. Thank you for anyone that humoured me through all of that. I love this kind of thing, as you can probably tell. But that was the short version. You're lucky you've not just got the extended edition. We could have been here all day, but it is a very rare thing to see in China, so it's worth highlighting. Anyway, let's go and see what's happening in the old town. Back in the source, this is Kashgar Old Town. Now, this is the first video of mine that you've seen from China, then welcome to the journey. It's been a cracking trip so far. I'm now in the Xinjiang province, which is a part of China that I think is absolutely mint, and Kashgar is like the cherry on top of the icing, on top of the cake of this trip. I love it here. This is a Uyghur city, a Muslim part of China, and we are in the far west. I'm actually only 50 miles from Kyrgyzstan, 100 from Tajikistan, and about 150 from Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I'm very close to a lot of very different cultures to what we've seen in the rest of China, and it shows everywhere. In food terms, that means we are less in the land of noodle and more in the land of kebab, and we are capitalising on that as we speak. Thank you. £1 English. Imagine that after a night out in Clee. I mean, it's a kebab wrap, so it's every bit as good as you can imagine. It's even got chips in it. I've not had chips for weeks. Kashgar, for me, is the coolest city in the coolest part of all of China. In this video, you're going to see a few reasons why that is, starting off with the Id Kah Mosque. It was originally built in 1442, nearly 600 years ago, but this one is not the original. The form we see today, this yellow bricked bad boy, was built in 1798, so it's still been here for some time. And now we're inside, we can kind of see the size of the thing. Outside it looks pretty modest, but inside there's space for 20,000 worshippers. It is a big old space. There aren't as many worshippers here as there used to be. I was reading some articles and some interviews with the imam of this mosque, and they reckon that 12 years ago, 13 years ago, there were about 10,000 worshippers coming every Friday. That's the biggest day of the week for Muslims to worship. Now there's less than 1,000, so not as many as there used to be, but it's still a big old job. I've spotted something interesting. Before I talk about it, I need to disclaim I am only mentioning this for historical accuracy. I am not trying to talk about the politics. I think that plaque on the wall used to be, until a few years ago, on the outside of the mosque, towards the entrance. As we came in, you maybe saw a gap above the door. I believe that's what was there. That's all I'm going to say about that. It is a very nice plaque. It's very colourful. It's full of Quranic script, as of course is typical in a mosque. But yeah, as a whole, the courtyard, the area, it's quite a nice place. Something I've noticed about Xinjiang compared to other Muslim parts of the world. I've been to a lot of Muslim parts of the world, as you may know. I love the culture. I love coming to the mosques and seeing them. But you can't go in any of them. They're all closed off to tourists. And it makes sense, really, but it's unusual. Normally, every other mosque in the world lets you in, aside from a couple of specific prayer times. You can't go in any of them so far in Xinjiang, which is a bit of a shame, because I bet it's pretty cool in there. Anyway, again, back on the outside, you can see how cool and colourful it is. A lot of yellow and blue going on like we saw earlier. Very colourful city, Kashgar. That's one of the best things about it. It's really, really colourful. The music, which you'll hear pretty much everywhere, is another really cool thing about this city. They're always playing from 1 or 2 floors up, so it just covers the city completely. And also the way they decorate their streets. They've got all these cartwheels, picture frames, old suitcases, and there's so many random alleyways just between the streets where they just look really old school. are just brilliant. Look at them. It all defo feels quite old world-esque. Like I said in the previous video, this is one of the famous parts of the Silk Road that lasted for 1,000 years. This is one of the key areas in it. It does feel a little bit frozen in that kind of period, in the best possible way. I could happily just get lost in these streets and alleyways for a long time, but when you do eventually look down from all the cool decorations and architecture, you see what's on offer, and there's loads of craft stalls available, loads of things that local people have made, like carpets, for example. Afghanistan, which is nearby, is obviously very famous for its carpets, and some of these on offer look remarkable as well. And I think the only real giveaway that we're not a few hundred years in the past are the surveillance cameras, which are of course everywhere all over China. Kashgar is no exception, but overall, love it here. It's ace. I'm currently going up these stairs, which I'm definitely not supposed to be going up, but I think I've managed to dig something out that I find that interesting, that won't be on any list anywhere of things to do in Kashgar, if I could make it unnoticed. Right, I've been spotted, so we're not going to get any higher up, but this is the former British consulate building that was based in Kashgar. I will not go into detail because I know everyone will turn it off, but that and the job of the person living there played a massive part in the Great Game, which was a British-Russian kind of bickering over who gets control over Central Asia. And it was based here in Kashgar in Xinjiang. Now it's kind of covered by boards and obviously about to be knocked down, but we've spotted it while it's still here. It's not been used for a long time, that. I don't even know what building it is I'm on. It just seems like some disused kind of flats maybe. Anyway, it's their fault for putting boards around it. I had to go up to have a look. It's kind of just hidden in this big hotel kind of complex right behind it, behind those boards. So if you're watching this as inspiration for coming to Kashgar, 1, you'll love it. 2, you're not going to find that on any list anywhere. Probably for good reason, looking at it. It's just an old building behind some boards in what looks like a construction site, so maybe not worth it. But context is important, and that has some good context behind it. There is another link with Afghanistan, and that is the film The Kite Runner, which is based a lot in Afghanistan, but none of the filming was done there. It was all done here, obviously for safety purposes, but they must have deemed this close enough to the Afghan culture and way of doing things to use it as a location. One unmissable aspect of Kashgar and Xinjiang in general that you're not going to see in this video is the mayhem of the markets they have on offer. In the previous video, I went to the Sunday Bazaar and it was chaos, but absolutely brilliant as an insight into how people do and did their day-to-day stuff. I strongly recommend you go and watch it. I'll link it at the end of this one if you're interested. It was madness, but it was ace. If this is close to what Afghanistan's like, then I'm in. I'm off to Afghanistan at some point. Look how cool and colourful and old-fashioned all of these streets are. I could waffle on for a long time about this place, but all in all, it is just a very cool part of China. It's not only really important historically, as we've mentioned, people have lived in and around here for a few thousand years and have always been pretty much the centre of the world in terms of trade and linking the East and West and everything, but also adds so much to the diversity of China. There's so much stuff here that you just won't get anywhere else in the country. Actually, on that centre of the world topic, here's something I learnt last night looking at a map. I am closer to Poland than I am to Shanghai, the other side of China. That is how wide and therefore diverse this country is. What it means is, when I fly back from Shanghai, back to Grimsby, that when the plane's coming over here, above where I am now, I'm only about halfway home. I know I've said a few times that it doesn't even feel like China, and if you've been following the journey and seen the different stages, you'll agree it looks nothing like it, but it is China. And with this kind of additional aspect to it, this whole different vibe, this culture, everything, I think does make China the most diverse country in the world. Some of these decorations just become absolute mayhem. We've got a camera, one of the surveillance camera posts, built out of cartwheels, of all things. Now then, being so far west means we suffer the same time zone confusion as we did in Urumqi, except here it's actually a bit worse because we're a bit further west. But anyway, that is that there are two different time zones running at the same time, because China is massive and insists on having one single time zone of GMT plus 8. It means it wreaks havoc with the sunrise and sunset times. It doesn't get light here until 10 a.m. When I got off the overnight train from Urumqi, it was nearly 9 in the morning and it looked like this. It could have been 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. It was pitch black. So the locals have an unofficial time zone 2 hours earlier, and it's never quite clear which time people are talking about unless you specify whether it's the unofficial Xinjiang time zone or the official Beijing time zone. But anyway, it's chaos. Something I will say is there is a lot of construction going on in here. Reconstruction, I don't know, reinforcing it maybe, or just redesigning some of it. I'm sure there are a variety of reasons for this, all of which will cause an argument one way or another. So for political neutrality, not going to comment, except for the fact that some of this stuff will be a lot newer than it might first appear. Right, let's get something to eat. I'm peckish. I kind of want another kebab. I know I can't really have another kebab, but I'm not sure I'm ready for these gigantic eggs or sheep heads just yet. Gone for the easy option. It's like a universal price. The melon in Xinjiang costs 3 kwai, 30p. It's the same everywhere, and it is the best melon in the universe. It's definitely not the easiest food to eat on the move, at least the cleanest, but let's have a look then. Alright, so it might have happened. Might be the second kebab of the day, but it's cheap and easy and I'm on holiday, so why not? Alright, so I reckon that's about that for Kashgar and for Xinjiang. Very, very cool part of China and the world in general. Actually, I've had an ace time out here. This is just a really cool area to be in. Is it my favourite part of China? I reckon it is. It's really hard to compare it with other parts. There's such a variety of places that we've been, and we've still got a few more to go. And I know Dali previously had the spot of my favourite place, but it's ace here. Not just today, not just what we've seen in Kashgar today, but the past few days in and around Kashgar and Urumqi. Xinjiang is brilliant. It ticks so many boxes for me, you know, the Muslim stuff, the old trade route-y stuff, all of that. So yeah, number one for me. Absolutely brilliant part of the world. Strongly recommend coming here if you're thinking about it. Anyway, that'll do. Onwards. Still more to look at in China. The trip is not done yet. Cheers, chaps. In a bit.